So Matthew chapter 13, we're finishing up the chapter today. Next week, we'll begin a new series called Battle Lines. Chapters 14 through 20, Jesus begins to really make distinction between who is with him and who is not. He amps up a little bit of sarcasm, which always draws me into following him because I like that part of him. So that increases. A lot of great things are going to happen. But he's going to wrap this up here with this almost a parable about the parables yet again. So here's what I want us to do. I want you to use your sanctified imagination. Put yourself on an island. You're on an island and you're surrounded by 6, 7, 8 foot tall kind of rice grass. So there'll be an image up here. This is what I want you to picture. This is where we are. All of us are there, right? There's hundreds of us and we're on this island. It's deserted. It's just us. And some of you, that sounds like you don't want to be there. But this is where we are. We're here and you see the water ahead of us. What we need to do is we need to get to the water. Because we're thirsty, we need to make some food, we need some stuff to drink, and so we've got to get to the water. So as we begin to get there, then the next picture will show you this is all you can see. All we see is grass ahead of us. It feels like maybe you're in a corn maze, you don't know where you're going. And at some point, there's someone who decides, I'm gonna go first. You know who that person is in the room, you know who they are. Immediately, you know the person who's gonna go first and put their foot in their mouth, but they're gonna go first. And so they're gonna be the ones to start this journey, and they begin this path. And so at first, it's just grass that's laid down, right? One person takes this journey, and as they do, the grass begins to lay down. The more they take the journey, the more the grass lays down, the more people that go on this journey. And then ultimately, the grass begins to grow around that path. As the grass grows, it begins to conform to wherever that path has been laid. And it's just by 1, 2, 20, 30, 40, 50 of us. Maybe at this point now we're all going and then it gets muddy. So we're still trudging through. We got to get to the water. We get to the water and we get back. So over the course of months and years, this path turns into another path, which is a bit harder. And so now finally we see the dirt. And now this has become really easy. Now the path, we're not trudging through mud. We're not having to figure out which to turn right or to turn left. We just follow the path that's been laid out in front of us. And then someone decides, hey, I'm gonna make this even easier. They cut down some trees and they make a wood path for us. It's almost a bridge. And so now, whenever we need water, the path has been laid out for us. And in fact, we don't have to think about it anymore. Remember, months and months ago, all we saw was grass. I'm like, I don't know how to get there. How will we ever get there? It just feels so far away. But now you wake up in the morning and you decide it's time to get water and you know exactly where to go. You don't have to think about it anymore. You just get your buckets, you go down to the water and you grab some water. This is how our brains work. Our brains literally have neuroplasticity, and what happens inside of our brains is that over time, the more we do a repeated action, we call it a habit, it literally forms grooves in our brains. And the more we do it, the deeper the grooves are. And that's true for physical activity. It's true again for habits. It's even true for mental activity. That the way we think and the way we repeatedly think creates grooves in our brains. And what we're learning about our brains is that our brains are lazy. They're just lazy. Brains will always choose the path of least resistance because they're trying to conserve energy for the things that are important, like actually living, actually making sure your body works. And so if there are decisions to be made, more often than not, our brains are hardwired to choose the path of least resistance, whatever we have just decided to do. We're almost on autopilot. Maybe you've experienced this. So I don't know how many of you, maybe you bought a new house at some point. And so you bought a house and you were leaving work and you got in your car and you drove home only to realize you went to your old house. That ever happened to you? And you got to the front door and you're like, I don't live here anymore. I should get back in my car before the cops are called. And so you get back in the car. Or maybe it's like for us, Meredith's parents had moved a year or two ago and I just got in the car like we're going to her parents' house. And so we begin driving, only I'm driving to their old house because our brains are wired to work in that way. That we will always choose the path of least resistance. So let's say we're back on this island and a visitor comes and this visitor has a helicopter. But the helicopter can't fit all of us. It can only fit a handful of us. And so there's one person who, again, decides, I'm gonna go first. They're gonna be Rambo. And so they get in the helicopter. And so as they get in the helicopter, and the helicopter takes them up and they show them this bird's eye view. And what you realize is the path we've been taking for months or a year is not the most direct path. And we all blame it on the guy that went first. So we blame it on him. It's his fault. He started it. But this is the path, and we've all done it. And it's become easy, it's become our way of life. And so what we recognize is there's actually a more direct path. There's a better way to get there. From the helicopter, you are landed, right? Whoever we are, a couple of us are landed back down. And so now we've got a job to do. We get back on the ground to begin a new path. But as that person, or 2 or 3 people, as you stand there before you, to the left is that wooden path. And before you, all you see is grass. And you remember how hard it was to make that path. And then you recognize, man, it's just me. How can I do this? I can't do this. So again, our brains are wired to choose the path of least resistance. So the way we rationalize is, well, that's already done. Like, I know this is more direct. What if I go wrong? What if I go right here? What if I still don't make it the way I'm supposed to? And then we default to, well, this is what I already know. This is where the grooves are in my brain. This is the way to the water. And so we're tempted then just to take the path that we've already been taking. What it requires for us is someone to actually take the first path. So what Jesus is doing in Matthew 13 is that Jesus is like the man with the helicopter, and he's taken the disciples up and he's given them a view of the world. And what he's trying to show them is, I know historically what you thought the kingdom was like and what you thought the path was to the kingdom. And he's lifted them up, and now he's showing them, but it's wrong. There's a better way. There's a right way. There's a more direct, a more efficient, more productive way. He's shown them a different way to see the world. He's showing them a new way forward. So that's where we pick up in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus has finished with all these kingdom parables. And now he's got a question for them in verse 51. The question is, have you understood all these things? Have you understood them? Now again, Matthew has shifted the setting for us back in verse 36. Remember, it says that Jesus left the crowds, and now he's made his way back into Peter's mother-in-law's house with the disciples. This is where he is now, and he's just got the disciples. And the disciples asked the question about the parable of the weeds. The setting, who is the you? Have you understood? It's the 12 disciples. He's asking them, have you understood? I've taken you up in the helicopter. I've shown you the lay of the land, and what I've revealed to you is that over the past thousands of years, that path has become twisted. And it's all you know. It's all you know. It seems easy, but I'm showing you a better way. I'm showing you a new perspective, a different way to see the world. So the question now is, have you understood all these things? So what are these things? Well, he just told us in context, it's all the parables of the kingdom. He began with a parable about the parables. It's the soils. That a sower scatters seed. There's 4 different kinds of soil. There's soil along the path that's hard and no seed takes root. There's soil along where the seed has been sown that's rocky, and it chokes it out. It's hard to get root. There's soil that has thorns in it, the anxieties and cares of this world, and they choke out the seed before it can produce anything. But there's a 4th soil that's good. It's good soil. It's been tended to. The thorns have been taken out. The rocks have been done away with. He gives them the parable of the wheat and the weeds, or the wheat and the tares, the wheat and the darnel. And we talked about how the weeds and the wheat grow together. And the temptation is to get rid of the weeds. And Jesus says, no, you can't, because the moment you get rid of the weeds, you lose some of the wheat. You need to let it grow together. And in that parable, the wheat are the sons of the kingdom, the children of God, the Christians, and the weeds are the evil ones, the non-Christians. And he's saying they grow together in the kingdom. They exist together in the kingdom. And at the end of the day, then I will take care of it. He's given them the parables of the mustard seed and the leaven. And he's made the point that the kingdom of God works best in small hidden places with small hidden people doing small hidden things. And it takes time, but over a long enough course of time, you'll see the impact of the yeast and you'll see the impact of the mustard seed. It'll overtake everything. You'll see it, just trust it. And then he gave them the parable of the treasure in the field, and he makes the point. The treasure of the kingdom is there. Do you want it bad enough that you'll take everything that comes along with you? You take the field with it. It's like a pearl where a merchant who sells pearls decides he's no longer a seller. Now he's just an owner. He wants it, and he gives up his entire identity, gives up everything to have this one pearl. And he finishes with the parable of the net, which is a recap of the parable of the weeds and the wheat. So he's asking them, have you understood the parables? Have you understood this new view of the kingdom? Do you see it? That's the question. Do you see it? Have you understood? Have you understood it? Because again, they have a path. And so Jesus comes onto the scene announcing that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's near. And so what he's laying before them is there are two kingdoms. There's a kingdom of this world, and then there's a kingdom of heaven. And he's laid before them. This is something they've been taught as Jewish men. They've been taught this their whole lives. It's been passed down from generation to generation. This is Old Testament idea, that there's a kingdom of this world. And there's coming a day when the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, will overtake the kingdom of this world. And Jesus shows up on the scene and announces it's here, it's time, repent, turn from the kingdom of the world and move towards the kingdom of heaven. And we're taught the same thing. Most of us growing up in churches were taught the same thing, but here's what we were taught. We were taught that to turn is to get out of the God-forsaken kingdom of this world, just deal with it until you die, and then you'll make it to a better place in eternity. You'll make it to the kingdom of heaven. Just deal with it now, and at some point things will be better. So we were taught, many of us, we were taught, the path we were taught was, this place is terrible, there's a better place coming, but you can't get there until you die, and you don't want to kill yourself, so just wait till you die, and then you'll be somewhere better. That's what we were taught. And so what that put in us then was a hatred for the world, a hatred for the people of the world, a disgust when we would see the weeds and the wheat growing together. Then rose in us then different understandings about what the kingdom was like, which country was the kingdom, which country isn't the kingdom, which politician will be the leader of the kingdom, which one is the anti-leader of the kingdom. And so it birthed in us all sorts of false theology. And for the Jews, the idea was when the Messiah comes, almost like lightning and thunder, when he comes, everything will be brand new. That he will overthrow the Roman Empire who has overtaken the Jewish kingdom. He'll overthrow them. He'll actually destroy all of that. He'll finally get rid of all those crazy pagan Gentiles. He'll destroy all of them. And he'll finally bring all the Jews back together. That when the Messiah comes, when the Savior comes, he will send thunder and lightning. The disciples call for fire from heaven to make everything right. And Jesus is teaching in his kingdom parables in Matthew chapter 13. Listen, I know you thought that was the path. Let me show you something. It's not the way. It's not the way it works. So he shows them what it works is the kingdom of heaven has invaded the kingdom of this world. It's slowly overtaking the kingdom of this world. And we're saying, yeah, but that can't be true because I don't see a change. Well, if you stare at leaven in dough, you also don't see a change. Well, that can't be true because there's still good people and bad people. Well, then it's just like the wheat and the weeds. So then what Jesus is saying, no, this is what it's like. And what he's showing them is this is the path. I've shown you the view. This is the path. This is what it looks like. So the question he asks in verse 51 is not, do you know, not have you heard. The question is, have you understood all these things? Have you understood them? And the way that Jewish authors write is that they would sprinkle particular words which are meant to trigger memories of other times this word has been used. And in the context, this is fascinating how it happens. So Jesus asked them, have you understood? Matthew 13, Jesus gives the parable of the soils, and here's how he describes the good soil in verse 23. What was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. So Jesus now has bracketed these kingdom parables around understanding. The one who actually has ears to hear this new perspective of the kingdom and understands it. And then he comes at the end and says, is that you, disciples? Which soil are you? Before we move forward into the real confrontation, I need to know, which one are you? Are the rocks swallowing you up? Are the thorns choking you out? I've planted seed, I need to know. Do you understand? And Jesus makes the point in the parable of the soils that those who understand, they bear fruit, they produce something. Something is different. Some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. But he says those who understand, you can tell. Those who understand, there's fruit, there's a difference. But this question, have you understood? The word understand, or to understand for us, is where we get ideas like syncretism. We get sinking, like to sink something. This is the word. Understand means to take two things and to put them together. That's what understand means. He's asking not have you heard, not do you have knowledge of, Not do you know a couple of things. What he's asking is, all the information I've given you, can you assemble that into a coherent thought? Can you put it all together? Before I stepped into full-time ministry, I taught high school upper-level math and physics. And if there's anything that people in the world do not understand, it's math and physics, right? We have knowledge, right? We know the foundational knowledge. And what happens in high school now is that, okay, so I need to take the knowledge you know of 2 + 2 = 4, and I'm gonna give you an equation with letters in it. And then I want to know, can you use the equation with the letters and the math that you know and put that together to build a skyscraper? That's what I want to know. Can you do that? Can you figure out the speed of 2 trains rushing towards each other? Can you figure that out? The answer overwhelmingly was, no, I cannot. No, I don't. But this is what it means. The idea is that you take 2 concepts and then you blend them together, that you put them, you see how they work together. So then we're left with, okay, what does it look like to understand then? What's he really asking? Well, Jesus, in his grace, gives us another parable. Look at verse 52. He says to them, therefore, every scribe, every expert in the law, every teacher of Old Testament law and Jewish doctrine, this is what a scribe was. Every scribe, everyone who knows the old and who has been trained for or who has been discipled for, or who is a disciple of. So, sidebar. To be a disciple is not to be a church attender. To be a disciple is to be someone who is being trained for the kingdom of heaven. It's someone who puts the work in, someone who submits to a trainer, someone who does the work to be trained for the kingdom of, that's what a disciple is. To be a follower of Jesus does not mean you're a good Southern boy who says yes ma'am and yes sir and shows up to church and eats your fried chicken with sweet tea in the afternoon. That's not what it means. To be a disciple is one who is being trained. Paul repeatedly talks about training himself, to be trained. It's why on Wednesday nights we offer training classes, discipleship classes, because I don't want good church people. We want disciples of Jesus. So here's what he's telling the disciples. All right, listen. Everyone who knows the old, which they would have known, and is being trained for the kingdom of heaven, is being discipled for the kingdom of heaven, is like a master of a house who brings out of his treasure, out of his storeroom, what is new and what is old. So those who owned houses and the wealthy, they would have had a storeroom or a treasury. Maybe it was a box, but for a number of people, it was a room. And inside of the treasury, what's called the treasure, would be treasures. And inside of that treasure would be things of old. Things that have been passed down for generations, things that would reveal old family history. And then also there would be some new things, some new memories, some new artifacts. And when people would come over, the way to greet someone, you'd greet them, you'd wash their feet, you'd give them a drink, and then the conversation would center around the man of the house would bring out of the storeroom this treasure and say, this is what our family's about. And you would combine, this is the ancestry, here's kind of where we are now, and it's all these treasures that are laid before people. You've done it before, like you've brought out old photo albums, you've shown them old things. Some of you grandmas, you've got all sorts of things from when your kids were little, and you try to pawn them off on your kids, and your kids are like, I don't want that. I don't want it. This is what it's like. So he says, listen, disciples, if you understand this, if you really get it, if you're able to put it together, it's beautiful. Here's what you're like. You're like when people come seeking the kingdom, you bring out of your heart, out of your treasure, out of your storeroom, knowledge of the old and knowledge of the new and how it's all worked together. What does it mean to understand the ways of the kingdom? It means that when someone approaches you and it comes into your house and has questions, that you can show them in such a way, man, this is amazing because this is what it was like, this is what it's like now, and it all works together. And so he tells the disciples, this is what you're like. If you're saying you understand, this is what it's like. One commentator says that it's in this way they understand both the new revelation from Jesus and how it fulfills the old promises of the Old Testament. So I want to talk first theologically about what this means, because some of us are going to like that. We're at that point where we like that. And so I'm going to talk personally about what it means for us personally. Theologically, here's what it means, just right off the bat. You cannot unhitch the Old Testament from the New Testament. Some of us grew up in the 90s and 2000s where we were only taught the New Testament. We were only taught the Gospels and Acts and the letters of Paul. We're taught all of that. And here's what's happened to us. We were left with a really thin kind of faith. And the storms of life came, and that thin faith did nothing for us in the storms of life. Because that thin faith wasn't rooted in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament. And so what he's saying is, theologically, you have to have both of them. On the flip side, there's some of us who are so dogmatic about old approaches and old things, old theology, that we don't have our minds open to new revelation from the Lord. I'm not saying new prophets, I'm saying new revelation, the way that he reveals a progressive revelation. He reveals himself to us and the way that we can combine those things. So some of us are so new school that we have no roots. And listen, you're not gonna make it. You have no roots to make it through the next storm of your life. You have no idea. And then there are some of us who are so staunch about the old that we have lost any sort of joy in following Jesus. He's trying to reveal things to us, and we just don't have a way to understand it. But personally, here's what it looks like. It looks like bringing out of the treasure old experience you've walked through. Old experiences you've had, maybe it's theological, maybe it's in church, maybe it's things you were taught in children's church with the flannel graph, maybe it's that. Maybe it's a history of trauma in your life. Maybe it's the way you were raised, and so you bring out of your storeroom the old. But the problem for you is you haven't done the work to understand the new revelation of Jesus. You wanna know why all that matters? Here's how the gospel lays on top of your trauma. And here's where grace and forgiveness come forth. Here's how the good news of Jesus lays on the old legalistic ways that you were taught, and the gospel comes forth. Then there are some of us who have moved so quickly into new revelation, new experiences, that we're not taking the time to say, yeah, okay, what does that have to do with what I used to know, with what I used to experience? And so Jesus is explaining this new kingdom, the mentality, the way of seeing the kingdom, it takes old experiences and new revelation and it puts them together. We make some mistakes though when it comes to it. For some of us, we misunderstand the old, which puts us in the exact same situation of the Jews in the New Testament. So listen, one of my greatest fears is that we'll have a church of people who have such poor theology about what it looks like when Jesus shows up that you won't even know that Jesus has shown up. Like we can mock the Jews all we want, but we aren't so different. Because there are times when you've been told, you've bought into a lie, it's been insinuated to you, that when Jesus shows up, all your wildest dreams will come true. You'll find health and wealth and prosperity, only to lose your job the next week and wonder where the promises are of God. You've been told, when you finally get Jesus at the center of your marriage, it's just gonna be amazing, only to find out it's not always. Well, if I finally just get my kids in church, then they'll finally stop wilding out and stop smoking weed and they'll just begin smoking the Spirit of Jesus. That's what I want for them to happen. Yeah, it's great, except for it doesn't happen, except for that's not how it works. Because again, we have the old path, we have the old mentality. When the lightning and thunder comes, man, then everything flips on its head. But we've placed so much stock in some old understanding that we haven't done the work to realize, no, it's not what the Bible teaches. And it's led my generation and those younger than me to what's called deconstruction. Because no one put the roots in the soil for them. So they were told some stuff, they were sold some lies about who Jesus was. And now what? Now that he's not the superhero that they were told he was going to be, then what do? Well, then your only option is, I gotta get out. I need to deconstruct. And there's some of us who I think a little deconstruction might be helpful for us. You're so stuck in old ways and in old thinking that if Jesus himself were to show up and tell you you were wrong, you would disagree with him. I love you, but you would. And then you would go on Facebook and post about it afterwards. About how you were right and this crazy guy from Israel was wrong. Listen, some of us, the new is supposed to bring new illumination to the old. This is how it works for us. Some of you, I love you. But I'm doing my best, like I'm working my tail off to show you a new perspective. Not because I want to be right and to make you wrong. I want to show you what life could look like with Jesus. I don't want you to be ugly and hard-hearted all the time. Like I want you to find joy again in Jesus. It's why I asked the question a lot, well, how's that going for you? I want you to take time to examine. The things that you thought were true, are they true? And do the work. Like how is that going? The things that you thought. And I'm trying to lay before you, no, it's new. This is what the Bible says. I know what that book said when you read it 50 years ago. I'm telling you what this book says. And I want you to see the old in light of the new, which takes us back to this grass field. So here we are. Like the disciples, we've walked through these kingdom parables. And so what's laid before you is the fact that, you made it to some water. And you've built a path and you've walked it and walked it and walked it. And what Jesus lays before us is, what if you were wrong? What if there's a better way? What if this is what the kingdom actually looks like? Sociologist by the name of Peter Berger, a number of years ago, created this concept that he calls plausibility structures. Sounds super exciting to all of you, I know, and so I want to just relax. So plausibility structure, here's the idea. So each of us individually, we have ideals and we have concepts in our minds in the way that we live our lives. And that individually has been formed. It's been formed through our nurture, how we were raised, the experiences we had as a kid, theologically, the experiences we had in church, the things that we were taught in children's church and in Sunday school. But we have these ideas, right? We have concepts, we have paradigms that are individual. And that's fine. But cultures are transformed when it's not just individual, but it's corporate. When a social group of people agree on something. And when that group of people agree on something and they believe it is plausible, not just that it's true, but that it's possible, that's when things begin to shift. So let me give you an example. Next weekend, in a little place called Athens, Georgia, thousands of people will gather. And individually, they believe the Georgia Bulldogs are the greatest team in the land. And some are louder about that than others. And some you like more than others. But that you got all these people. And then you get them all together and the entire city of Athens shuts down. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. And then this tiny little school called UT Barton comes in. And 3 of them think they can beat the Georgia Bulldogs. And their moms probably think that too. And so they come in. But the beauty of what that coach has to do is he has to get them in the locker room and he has to explain to them, no, not just that you can. I want to show you that it's plausible, it's possible. So you know what he will do? He will pull up old tapes of Appalachian State beating Michigan. Okay, he's going to pull that up. He's going to show them how the small school can beat the big school. That's what makes it plausible. Not true, because we know any given Saturday somebody can beat somebody. But what makes it plausible is that they've seen it happen before. The question in a plausibility structure is not, is it true, but is it possible? Is it plausible? We've got 3 kids. 2 of them are social and outgoing, and one of them is not so much until he gets comfortable with you. And this thing for him is that he's not a big fan of new experiences. He doesn't like big social environments. Like even for his birthday, he doesn't want to have a big party. He wants to have one friend over. That's what he wants to do. That's like the best day of his life, if he can just do that. And so for him, like it's not enough for someone who is outgoing, who is an extrovert, to tell him it's gonna be awesome. He's like, well, of course you think it's awesome. You're like the Lego guy. You think everything is awesome. And I don't work that way. What he needs is he needs people like him. And if he's gonna do a new experience, what he needs is somebody who is like him to be the first person to take a new experience and say, oh, well, if he liked it and he's like me, then maybe I would also like it. Does that make sense? Okay, that's what a plausibility structure does. But it's not about what we know or about what is true. It's about what is experienced. It's about things being proven. So we're back on the island and we've got the grass before us and you stand there. And the 500 of us in the room, 475 of us are like, no, we're gonna take the path because it's just easier. It's already done. We know how to go that way. I know how to defend it. It's already been done. The work's already been done. There's a handful of you who are like, no. This way is better. And we're like, it's not better, it's just your way. And so you can argue all you want. Like you can argue all you want and tell the rest of us how dumb we are and how narrow-minded we are and how we'll never understand. And you can do it all you want with your words. But what I need from you is that I need you to be the first one to take steps on that path. And while you're taking that path and you've got a few other people and you're doing the work and you're trudging through the mud and you're trying to get grass out of the way and there's no path, you're forming a path. And while we're here arguing about how dumb you are and you come back with water, by the time we would even made it to the first curve, I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's plausible. And then a few more get on, like, well, we're all gonna go. So now what was 30 is now 70 or 100. Then you go and then you come back like, oh, wow. This many people can fit on that path and you got there so fast. Well, then maybe we should. This is what Jesus is laying before them. What he's laying before the disciples is, will you be the first? Not just to preach it, not just to talk about it. When you see it, the question is, who's gonna go first? Who's gonna start the new path? Who's gonna prove to the wooden path takers that this path is plausible? It's possible. Because from there, I would imagine, from that point forward, once we form that path, anyone on that island will no longer take the long path. They're gonna take the direct one, the right one. So what he's laying before the disciples. We need to be willing to go first to create this path forward in understanding, not to talk about it, not to say what Jesus is like, not to say what it's like when he's Lord of your life, but to actually do it, to live like it, to believe that it's actually possible. If you read throughout the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, the church is referred to, just to use our term, a colony, an outpost of the kingdom of heaven in this world. It's the outpost of a distant land. It's an embassy. It's the kingdom of heaven's embassy in the midst of enemy territory. It's the American embassy in Russia. That's what it is. So at the American embassy, it's not Russian rule, it's American rule. It's a safe place for those who are trying to get out of the kingdom of this world, the kingdom of Russia, to move into the kingdom of this kingdom of heaven. That's what the church is like. Church is supposed to be an outpost. It's supposed to be a plausibility structure to the world that says, I know that's how the world is working. I know. And I know that path has already been carved. I know it feels easier. I know. But I want you to be here. I'm going to show you it's possible. A pastor in Portland named Michael Lawrence says the local church is meant to make the truths of God visible right here, right now. Not in a distant land, not in one day, not in happily ever after, not once you have wings and streets of gold and mansions and you can play football in the yard that's so big. Not that. Here, now. The church reveals to the world that it's possible, that the kingdom of heaven is here and it's now. So to use our diagram, the church is where the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of this world overlap. That's what the church is. And you want to know why? Here's what I believe. Why I believe the church in America, why we're dwindling, why churches are closing their doors. It's because the church has moved out of the overlap and into the kingdom of this world. I believe what's happened is that we've adopted the old way of thinking. It's like, come get on this spaceship, it's the way out. As opposed to saying, come here with us, it's the way in to the presence of God. In this world, we're in it, but we're not of it. Come here, come to the embassy. Come be part of this. Another problem we've made is that we're preaching it all day long, but not one of us is living it out. We're declaring it, we're boycotting, and we're protesting like nobody's business. And the world, I just have to imagine, the world is like, if I wanted angry people, I would just get on Twitter. I don't know why I need to go to church for that. If I need people who are angry about everything, I think I can find that in the public school system. I don't understand why I need to go here. See, the church is supposed to make evident, make visible the truths about God right here and right now. Well, how? Well, here's what continues in Matthew 13. When Jesus finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his hometown, he taught them in their synagogues. He's teaching those of the old treasure, teaching them the new treasure. They might see it all work together. And they were astonished and said, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Joseph's son, the one from Nazareth? And we know Mary, and we know James and Joseph and Simon and Judas, and there's no way in heck they're the Messiah. Like, we know how they are. We don't let our kids play with those kids. And then his sisters, aren't they here? Well, then where did this man get all these things? Here's what's happened. Jesus has shown them the view, and they're wrestling. What are we going to do with this? This is the way forward, Jesus says. If you got the old, I want you to see the old in light of the new. Here's the new path forward. They got a decision to make. What are we going to do? Well, verse 57, they take offense at him. They take the old way. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household. So he left and did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. So real quick, not in my notes. I just wonder if we're not seeing the mighty works of God in the church because we've chosen the old path like they did. And he's like, wow, what's the point? I'm out. But here's what's fascinating. Jesus preached the kingdom. He performed miracles. And even with Jesus preaching and his miracle working, the people did not believe. Follow the story of the New Testament in church history. You know, some of his family did believe. In fact, his brother named James would be the pastor of the church in Jerusalem, would write a book called James at the end of the New Testament. And when James would tell you about when he finally decided to believe that Jesus was who he says that he was, not in his preaching, not in his miracle working, but in the resurrection of Jesus. So it tells me this about the church. It's going to be more than preaching and miracles to invite people into the kingdom. It's going to be a group of people devoted to the resurrection of Jesus. People who actually believe that death doesn't end in death, but that death can turn to life. People who actually believe that no matter what your sin in the past, present, or future, it's all been forgiven by Jesus on the cross, and he raised to new life to give you hope that tomorrow doesn't have to be like today. Not of people who are gonna preach it, not of people who are gonna wait for miracles and sing about it, people who in their bones are gonna live it, who believe it, who believe the kingdom works in such a way that it's not trying to get us out, but it's trying to get him in. Who actually see the work of God the way that we see wheat and weeds growing together. Who aren't turned off by the fact that there are broken people growing with people. That we aren't turned off by the fact that people are putting cigarettes out in the parking lot. But instead, come on in, come on. Let's grow together. We'll figure it out at the end. Let's just grow together. It'd be a group of people who believe that the church works best in the small and hidden places. It works best on the margins. Who aren't fighting for some kind of fame for the church, but instead are doing the dirty work on the margins. And even though we can't see it, we believe he's still working. People who are convinced of it. People who live lives unfluttered by the winds and waves of politics and sociology. What would it be like if the church didn't lose her mind when the wrong person became president? Who actually believed what they said, that Jesus is on the throne. Is he or is he not? And if he isn't, who cares? Who cares? We're in the embassy. Who cares? Don't lose our minds about a school choice decision or a new superintendent, but instead, we're the ones who maintain peace. What if we're the ones who don't fret about our property value, but instead see lost souls who need to know the grace and mercy of Jesus. Like, what if that's who we were? What if we actually believed the kingdom was like this? What if we believed it's worth the field to buy the treasure? What if we believed it's worth losing my entire identity as a merchant that I might know Jesus and the power of his resurrection? What if we actually lived like that? What if we were people who believed in the doctrine of the resurrection, that death can lead to life? What if we were people where open confession wasn't met with condemnation, but instead with grace and a hug? What if we believed in actual repentance, not just saying it, but doing it? And what if we were a people who were so reasonable that we aren't shaken when the world changes? That is what the world is longing for. And where heaven meets earth, you'll find the church. Not in a distant land, but as an outpost of a distant land in this one right here and right now. So what's being asked of us is, do you understand it? Do you understand these things? And if you do, you'll produce fruit. Some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. But if you do, you'll have love, joy, and peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and faithfulness, and gentleness, and self-control. And in fact, you'll have more tomorrow than you have today, and more in 10 years than you had today. That's what it means. That we would be people like that. People of the kingdom. So who's gonna walk first? We've seen it. Who's gonna take steps first? Husbands in your home, it's you. You go first. You create a home that models the kingdom of heaven. It's you. And your wife will walk with you, and your little ones will walk with you, and eventually your teenagers will walk with you as well. Managers, bosses, it's you. You go first. You create a company that looks like that. Small group leaders, you go first. If you call yourself a disciple, we go first. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Don't know what this week has looked like for you or what the past few years have looked like for you. But I'll tell you this, that when you see the kingdom from the helicopter, you can begin to make sense of whatever your week has been like, or your past year or month, or even your life. When you see your trauma, when you see your joys and successes, not from the ground, but from the view of the kingdom, you begin to understand. So the invitation this morning is the same question Jesus gives his disciples. Do you understand all these things? Not do you know it, not do you mentally ascribe to it. Can you see how it all fits together? That's the question. That's what he's asking. And if you can, your level of responsibility rises. Because now you got to show everyone. You're like the manager of a house who brings out of the treasury, old and new, and you put it on display. And you don't get to decide whether people like it or not, but you do have to put an accurate display on. You see the old in light of the new in light of the old. You have roots that get you through the storms of life. Maybe you're here today and this is not the kingdom of heaven that you were taught. This is not the Jesus you were told. You grew up in a church where Jesus would never even let you into his kingdom. It's like, now you're too dirty. And your fear was, if I even cross the doors of the church, the whole thing's gonna blow up. Well, just look around, we're okay. We're all right. Because the Jesus of this kingdom is one who says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest for your souls. Who says, I have paid the debt that you could never pay, that I have washed you clean. So the invitation is to believe in the cross and the resurrection. That's the invitation, to believe that he is who he says that he is and give your life to it. Father, we have been given eyes to see. Through your word, through your spirit, we've been given eyes to see. Maybe we're seeing things differently from the helicopter than we can see from the ground. And so, God, here's the challenge for us, that when we get back on the ground, what do we do with it? So if there's someone in the room today who's feeling like, I need to be the first one to take the step, God, don't back off. Press deeply in his or her soul and mind. Yeah, you take the steps towards the kingdom. May we as the church, God, be a plausibility structure who show the world, no, it's possible to have peace. It's possible to be loved and to be loving. It's possible to walk in grace. It's possible to walk through suffering knowing there's a God who is good. It's possible. So help us to be a beacon of hope in this kingdom of the earth as we walk in the kingdom of heaven. It's in Jesus' name I pray.